I'm on, huh? You heard what he said. I'm on. Okay, good morning, everybody. All right. Okay, so we are going to continue our discussion that we started last week. Well, we didn't start it last week, but... And quickly, a quick review. So remember this basic principle. Moral rules are not just random, arbitrary things. Moral rules grow out of an understanding of reality. So when we talk about the reality out of which the Christian moral order is built, there's two key things here. Number one is the nature of God, particularly the holiness of God, and the second is the sanctity of human life. What is a human being? And that's what we're going to focus on, what a human being is. And you will recall that a human being is a transcendent soul enfleshed in a physical body, okay? It is an eternal being. So a human being is eternal. We have a start, okay, but we don't have a finish. And that we are much more than just a physical machine. There is a human soul is something much greater than simply a very complex biological organism. A human being is created by God, for God, in the image of God. So that's another important aspect of the reality of what a human being is that we need to keep in mind for purposes of glorifying God. That's ultimately our purpose, okay? Our purpose is to glorify God. Now, that doesn't mean that God doesn't care, he doesn't want us to be happy or anything like that, but our purpose is to glorify God, and any human being that lives their life with no view toward glorifying God is simply missing the reason why they exist to begin with. We are human beings, uniquely able to fear, love, and trust in God, okay? Animals can be nicely behaved or not nicely behaved, but they can't do what human beings do, and therefore human beings are uniquely moral agents and accountable to God, okay? So that also is an important reality for how the moral order is built, that human beings are capable of things that give rise to these moral rules. We are also fragile. A human being is fragile, and because this world is a sinful and fallen world, we are surrounded by dangers, and that means that human beings, human life, needs constant care and protection, okay? You can, I'm always picking on squirrels. Squirrels just take care of themselves. They don't really, for the most part, need other squirrels. They just need nuts out there, and they find them. But human beings need a lot more than just, nuts on a tree. And if we don't get it, we don't live. In fact, if you stop and think about all that human life needs in order to flourish, it is really quite stunning what we need. Unlike other animals, we are damaged, human beings are damaged, but we are redeemable, okay? So those are two important points of what the Judeo-Christian moral order assumes, that human beings are damaged and flawed. It also assumes that human beings are redeemable and therefore not trash, okay? So that's the reality upon which the moral order is built. The moral order that we talked about last week was the moral order regarding sex, marriage, and family. And what does that moral order look like given the assumptions about what a human being is that we just talked about? Well, the moral order is it is designed to promote human flourishing, and it is based on duty. Okay? Those are two key ideas here. The moral order is designed to promote human flourishing of all humans to the extent that that's possible, and it is based on duty. That is, human beings have duties to God and to one another, a whole lot of duties. And that just as we will say your purpose in life is to glorify God, also your purpose in life is to do your duty, okay? Doing one's duty does not mean that you're unhappy in doing it. It means that you're doing it whether you're happy or not, okay? This is your duty, therefore this is what I do, okay? So we looked at how marriage, sex, and family are organized from a moral point of view in the Scripture in order to promote human flourishing, and how it consists of a whole web of duties. We began with family, the importance of family because human beings are fragile, because human beings need a great deal, and because human beings are creatures of immense worth. God builds up around us an edifice designed to help us grow into the very best human beings we can be and survive and flourish as well as possible. So strong families, permanent families are the ideal. A new family formation is built on marriage, that is a permanent thing, so that we don't, the idea is that no child and no human being begins life without all the protections that a human being needs. This, again, is the ideal. And so we're in families from start to finish, and it provides the most protection to the most vulnerable. The unique purpose of human sexuality that we talked about last week. We talked about this, the moral gravity attendant on the sexual act. The sexual act is designed to produce a human being. A human being is a transcendent soul enfleshed in a physical body. A human being is an eternal creature created by God, for God, in the image of God. A moral agent whose purpose is to glorify God, of immense value to God, but fragile. Now that is what we're tinkering with in the sexual act. That's what might be produced. The only thing that I wanted you to reflect on last week with this particular line is that there is a great deal of moral gravity attendant upon any behavior that might produce a being like what we've just discussed, okay? Whatever you think that the morals should be, this is not just a plaything. This is not just something that we do because we like it, okay? This is something of immense importance. It can be immensely good. It can result in an immense amount of trouble and problems and tragedy. So it is something which we handle with a great deal of care, all right? So the fundamental rule in Christian sexual ethics can be described by the word chastity. That is, this sexual act is of such importance, and the consequences of this act, even if only a probability, even if only a slim probability, are so huge that the rule is chastity. This act must not be engaged in unless the couple is married and therefore, and with an understanding of marriage, that is prepared to take care of this child and give everything to this child that it needs, okay? Anything less than that is potentially to bring a child into the world of immense value for purposes of glorifying God, and we are not here ready to give it its very best chance. Since it is human flourishing that we're looking for and not just bare survival, something other than dropping the kid off at a local hospital and running is necessary, okay? A child needs a great deal. You think about what a child needs just to get it to 18, and if you imagine that at 18 your work is done, then you've never done this before, okay? So, all right. So the reason why, well, let's put it this way. Christians are very straight-laced about sex. They should be, to the point where the world will laugh at us about this. But the reason for that is because of what we understand this act is about and what the potential consequences are. And I say consequences, I just mean what follows from it. Not necessarily bad things, very good things, but of profound importance. And that fundamentally, what comes of this act comes from God. So we call it procreation, not reproduction, okay? Not only are Christians straight-laced about the act itself, insisting that it be done within the context of a permanent marriage, but we also regulate, I say we, I mean the moral code relating to this, regulates not only the act itself, but everything that leads up to the act, okay? Now, this is, of course, culturally conditioned. Some cultures are much more uptight than others, but if you want to look at it this way, the simple act of a young man and a young woman holding hands can be viewed as a precursor to the sexual act, okay? It obviously doesn't automatically lead to that, good thing, but the whole idea of romance and dating and courtship and all of this, ultimately, the idea is these two are going to come together, they're going to get married, they're going to have children, they're going to start a new family, and this family is going to consist of little creatures of immense value created by God, for God, in the image of God, and all the rest, okay? So that means that even whether boys and girls should be holding hands or not is something to be regulated. Notice I say regulated, I didn't say forbidden. But regulated means there are rules. There are rules attendant to these things. Should there be chaperones at dances? Once the dance starts, do we let anybody go outside? These sorts of things that are, most adults are very well aware of where these rules came from and why. By the way, the kids are too. They don't like them, okay? They don't like them, but they know full well why they're there. And we know full well why they're there too. And if you can relax them a little here or there, it may not make any difference. You can trade out this rule for that rule, that might be fine. But if you just throw them all out, interesting things are going to happen and generally not good, okay? But there's a reason why Christianity has always been so very, very uptight and straight-laced about human sexuality, even such simple things as, whether boys and girls should ever be in a room together, okay? Even if they promise to be good. And that it's one thing when you've got a pair of 8-year-olds and they're playing quietly in a bedroom by themselves. It's very different when they're 14. Okay, that's different, and we all know it's different and why it's different. And there are things that we allow and things that we do not allow. And sometimes they seem arbitrary. But they're not arbitrary. They're all designed ultimately to protect this act. Actually, is to protect the product of this act. Okay? All right. So the upshot here is the nature of human life makes sex what it is. If you think human beings are just animals, then your view of what sex is and should be is going to change. Hold on. It makes marriage what it is, and it makes family what it is. Okay, all of these things are designed because life is precious to God and belongs to God, and therefore we really are not allowed to make it a plaything. Yes?
So, going back to what we were talking about, there's a lot of, we live in an age today where talking about the sexual act and what it means, and even with younger children, raising them up, I've never been taught why you don't have sex before marriage.
Yeah.
What, what it means, why, I was just told you don't have sex
Correct.
before marriage. I was never taught, you don't have sex before marriage because,
Right.
This, that, the other. It is a taboo.
Yeah, well, Stephanie, and that you very good point that you make, which is exactly why I'm pursuing this the way I'm pursuing it. In other words, I'm beginning with the underlying rationale before we get to the rules. Otherwise, the rules are just rules. And if you don't know why you're supposed to do something, it's much less likely you're going to do it, particularly if there's all kinds of incentives not to. So you are right, and as a culture, we don't talk, we actually do, but we don't talk this way at all. So now what we're going to get into is how we do talk about it. There is an alternative moral order out there these days. It is not a moral order designed to promote human flourishing. And it is not built on the concept of duty. It's a moral order designed to promote personal fulfillment and well-being, and it is not based on duty, but rights and freedoms. Okay, I mean, you'll recognize all of this is quite common in the warp and woof of our society. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take a quick look. Well, I don't know how quick it'll be. We're going to take a look at what cultural norms have arisen with respect to sex, marriage, and family that is built on this alternative moral code. And it is an alternative moral code. There are things where a Christian would gasp and say, that's bad, where a person who follows this code would say, there's nothing wrong with that. And on the other hand, they would say, here's something that we think is really terrible, whereas we Christians would say, there's nothing wrong with that. Okay? It's because we're in two different universes here, dealing with different realities and different understandings of things. So if we want a moral order that is designed to promote personal fulfillment, now that's different than duty. Duty says, this is what you have to do, and if that results in personal fulfillment, fine, and if it doesn't, you better do your duty anyway. So it's not that personal fulfillment has no duty or that duty has no personal fulfillment, but which is the sort of the touchstone here. Yes?
Would you address the origins of morality? I mean, where did that come from? Because everything is based on morality, and I understand that, but who dictates what is moral?
Okay. I'll give you the modernist view. The modernist view says that morality comes from the same place that our biology comes from, and that is, it is the product of adaptation over millions of years as human beings adapt to their environment and adapt to being social animals, and essentially, in order to build rules to allow us to live together in the savannah of Africa or wherever it happens to be, human culture has negotiated these things, and where they actually began is in the midst of time. We can't really put our finger on it, and they're passed down. And so what a sociologist might say, or an anthropologist might say, is that our rules today were formulated tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years ago. Some of them still make sense, some of them don't. But they essentially arose from the same reason that human beings started to walk upright or developed language or other things that are an adaptation. Now, that's...
Morality is not based on societies coming together and deciding on that.
Well, a sociologist or an anthropologist would say that the morality is somewhat random and it just kind of comes up as a product of evolution, and therefore they would say we can negotiate these things, we can change them. Now the Christian worldview says this, that morality is intrinsic to what God has created. Okay, so the origin of morality is therefore with God. It's the nature of God and what He's created. Since God has made human beings this way, and since, understand this, God is the ultimate underwriter of human life. Okay? The scripture says, whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed, for in the image of God He created him. Okay? In other words, I will require from somebody who kills their life. Okay? Since God has created human beings the way they are, and since God says they're important to me, therefore, and then we start getting the rules. Okay? So from a Christian point of view, the origin of morality is the same as the origin of us. The one who made us also makes the rules, not because He's stronger than us, although He is, and that would be perfectly good enough reason for Him to make the rules, but because of what He made. Okay? So in that sense, for a Christian then, morality is not negotiable. Now, when I say that, I already mentioned that there's all kinds of ways that a moral rule can be enacted, and that is going to be different from culture to culture, and that's okay, but the underlying moral principle is not negotiable. Okay?
So it's not based on the Ten Commandments or...
No, the Ten Commandments are an expression of God's will. But what I'm saying is, underneath the Ten Commandments are these realities. The Ten Commandments are not just 10 random things that God put out there just to see whether we'll do them or not, okay? The Ten Commandments are an expression of a moral order designed to promote human flourishing and requiring duty, okay? Our modern cultural understanding deals with these matters very differently. So let's take a look at sex, marriage, family, and personal fulfillment and how these go together practically. What I'm about to tell you, what we're going to be, you'll recognize, but I am not promoting it, any of it, so please don't turn me over to the district president and say, look what he's teaching. I'm not, but I'm telling you what you already know. And if you don't know this, then turn on your TV, you'll see it. That's where it is, and that's where all of us are just run into this constantly, okay? The central thing is emotional, psychological, and physical happiness and well-being of the individual in our society. That is the central thing. We all want our children to grow up to be happy and well-adjusted, and we are all trying to be happy and well-adjusted, and that's it. I mean, you just think about our society's attitude toward church. What's the purpose? Is church bad in our society? No, not if you understand its true purpose. What's its true purpose? There it is. And if church does that for you, then by all means, go to church if it helps you that way. But if it doesn't, if it makes you feel guilty or limits your ability to, well then, either find a different church, find a different religion, or make up your own religion, or have no religion. But this is the key thing, all right? Now, everybody recognizes that we're not all happy and well-adjusted, but this is the goal that we're aiming for, and therefore this moral order is designed to promote that. At least that's ostensibly what it's trying to do. All right, first thing you got to realize is satisfying sexual desire is necessary for well-being. And that's just an axiom in our society today. If you were to tell somebody, well, if you're not married, you can't have sex, they'll just say, what? What? That's right. Well, you can't do that. Well, yeah, you can. That's not healthy because, this is Sigmund Freud, by the way. Sigmund Freud is teaching us that if we are not acting out our sexual desires in this way, then we'll act them out in that way because really all we are sexual animals. This is Sigmund Freud. Our ids are there waiting to come out. And so either we control them this way or they'll come out that way, but we can't just not. We can't just say no, okay? All right. Our society considers it necessary to be a happy and well-adjusted person that you have a fulfilling sexual life, which means fulfilling your sexual desires, okay? That's what it means. And so in our society, we don't tell people that you cannot fulfill your sexual desires because that would be to subject them to something less than a fulfilling life. And we just don't do that. That's mean. That's cruel. It's like denying them food. So we don't do that. But understand that statement, necessary for well-being, satisfying your sexual desire, and a Christian would say, no, no. In fact, oftentimes it's just the opposite, satisfying your sexual desire, because we're screwed up, see? And our sexual desires are screwed up too. So it's not a denial that sexuality is important to human beings. It's not that at all. What we're saying is, just because you have a sexual appetite doesn't mean that there's anything good or healthy about you satisfying that. Maybe it is and maybe it's not. It depends on what's in us. But we do not take it as axiomatic that satisfying our desires is necessary to our, because remember, what's our job? Our job is to glorify God. Our job is not to fulfill ourselves sexually. Freud would say God is bunk, and that the only way a human being can be truly fulfilled is they have to fulfill themselves sexually. That's what he would say. By the way, I watched that movie that you suggested. It's about a fictitious. Well, what they said is it is a speculative conversation between Sigmund Freud and C.S. Lewis toward the end of Sigmund Freud's life. It's based on the fact that Sigmund Freud, like 2 or 3 weeks before he died, asked and received a visit from a young Oxford Don, but we don't know who it is. So this movie says, gee, I wonder if that was C.S. Lewis. Wouldn't that be fascinating? And then it builds a conversation. What would Freud say to C.S. Lewis? What would C.S. Lewis say back to Freud? Very, very good. I enjoyed it very much. You can find, it's called the last session, or Freud's last session. That's correct. You find it on Netflix. I know there. Okay. Anyway, it's boring in the sense that it doesn't have a plot. It's a conversation, but if you enjoy it, if you enjoy that kind of thing, it does a good job. Anyway, okay. The only moral constraints are consent and health. Now, maybe I'm overstating that, I don't know, but let's think about that. Our society today does not have many moral constraints on sexuality. 2 adult human beings who consent, the presumption is what they do is their own business, and that's fine. So long as we hear a lot about safe sex, okay, and consent, but beyond that, it's hard to think of other moral prohibitions that our culture imposes upon people. It does have moral constraints with regard to children on the idea that they can't consent. And that's an interesting thing by itself, because a lot of that's a legal fiction. Legally, a 16-year-old cannot consent to sex. But really, can they? And I don't know, where you're going to draw the line. At some point, you're going to say, that child doesn't know what he's doing. But 18 is arbitrary as far as whether somebody knows what they're doing and knows what they want and can say yes. So our society is not far away at all. Well, I shouldn't say it's not far away. We do not really stigmatize sex between 16-year-olds or 15-year-olds. We will if it's a teacher that's doing it or an adult, okay? But if it's 2 kids, that's just, they're just doing what kids do, and that's very natural. And in fact, it'll be celebrated as, in many ways, just very lovely. Okay. Now that's very interesting because I told you before, I identified the moral gravity attendant to the sexual act. That is exactly opposite here, where we have almost no prohibitions. If you've got 2 25-year-old people, whatever they want to do, as long as it's not hurting anybody, is okay, because understand that human sexuality is not considered a moral thing. It's not immoral. It's just amoral in our society today. It's like eating. It's a normal, natural act. That's how our society deals with it. It's things that people want, but we don't attach to it moral stigmas or rules or prohibitions as though there's something intensely sacred about it. Yes?
Yeah, going back to like the 16-year-olds or even 15-year-olds, when it comes to sexual, we say that they don't know, they can't consent because they don't know, they can't consent to the act, but we can try them to a crime as an adult.
Oh, yeah, well,
but
I'm not pretending there's anything consistent here.
But they can't consent to a sexual act as an adult. So it's kind of a loony bin type scenario.
Yeah, I'd say, I think that's a good technical way to put it, but yes, loony bin. Well, yeah, look.
I mean, it's if they can't consent to sex, then they shouldn't be tried as.
Well, of course.
If that makes sense.
Well, but that's why I said, can a 16-year-old consent? I mean, really? And the answer is, well, really, obviously they can. Now, legally? Well, no, legally you can't sign a contract. But actually, can you? Well, 16-year-olds.
They can emancipate themselves.
Well, this is true. Okay, so now, unless you want children, use contraceptives. Now, I want you to note how I phrase this, okay? Unless you want children. In other words, the presumption is that you don't want children. But if you do, okay, but unless you do, the exception is that you want children. So contraception is to make sure that the exception stays the exception, okay? So just understand that's how our society looks at this. You should use contraception. That's part of what we mean by safe sex, right? Using contraceptives of some sort. Because it's like neutering your cat, okay? Isn't it like that? Now, so use contraceptive unless The odd case is you want children, because we're going to find out that that's an odd case in our society, but it fortunately happens some. Okay, and then if something goes wrong, get pregnant anyway, abortion is available. I'm not saying that society demands that you get an abortion, but it demands that that be available if you wish to choose that, okay? And because you didn't want to be pregnant. Now, I'm not saying that you've got some horrible thing going wrong with the pregnancy, or it's the life of the woman is it. I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about you may choose. And our society, culturally, as a norm, insists that this be a choice. And we'll come back to that in a little bit. Okay. Now let's look at some cultural norms here that are very typical. First off, how old do you have to be before you can begin to become sexually active? I'm not asking for your personal opinion or what you think the Bible says. What I'm saying is, in our society, what do you think the answer to that is? Let's imagine that we're watching a sitcom, and the sitcom features a 15-year-old, and the 15-year-old is now involved in a relationship with another 15 or 16-year-old boy, and the parents are concerned, and the question is, he wants to, and I might want to, but I don't know. What do you think the advice would be given to this young lady?
16.
Okay. Yeah, let's say 16.
I have a bird to the bees at 16.
Okay, so we're going to tell them how it works, because if you're going to do this, then it's necessary that you be safe. Okay, got to understand. The question, is it time yet? Yeah, okay. Maybe a little talk about consequences. A little talk about if you're emotionally ready. What if the girl says, how do you know when you're ready? How do you know? Okay. Well, you'll know. You'll feel. It'll feel right when it comes time. Can you be pressured? The boy is putting pressure. This is how it's going to be. The boy is putting pressure. The girl's not sure. Okay? And so the thing is, well, no, not pressure, because consent is everything here, but you'll know when it's time, but don't be in any rush. This is the sort of advice, okay? Now, would I feel better if they say, wait till you're 18? No. What would I say? If you're ready to get married, you're ready to have sex. If you're not ready to get married, you're not ready to have sex. Do you know what marriage is? If you don't, then forget the whole thing, and let's go back to the start, okay? All right. So that's the first question. When do you start? Our society has no problem with high schoolers starting, as long as that's why we're handing out contraceptives in high school. Now they'll tell you, well, because they're going to do it anyway. Do you know why they're going to do it anyway? Because there's no restriction. And I don't mean there's just not a rule out there. I mean, society as a whole does not look down on this. Individual people might, but then they're the ones that are all uptight. But as a culture, we don't. And that's why if they're going to hand out contraceptives at a high school, some people will scream, but we know that that's because, they're just all uptight. But it's going to be justified because they're going to do it anyway, and if they're going to do it anyway, then they need to practice safe sex, and that's what we need to do. And as you've pointed out, this is entirely divorced from what? The realities of what a human being is and what human life is and what you're talking about here. It's just reduced to, well, boys will be boys, and therefore better provide them contraceptives. Okay. Sex is a normal part of dating. Does anybody disagree that that is the normal cultural attitude in our society? I don't mean necessarily sex on the first date, although, yeah, that's right. If you're decent, you'll wait till your third date. Can we have 3 dates in one night? Maybe that's the.
That's what they.
Yeah, that's the advice.
But that's even like on real popular TV shows that a lot of these girls watch.
Mm-hmm.
And the magazines.
Oh yeah. If Cosmo says it, well, then it must be true.
That
Yeah.
It's always like, oh, I don't have sex on the first date. It's always the third date.
Yeah.
At least the third date.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so now all these girls are like, okay, I gotta wait till at least the third date to,
Sure. Now, and note that, though, whether we're talking about the first date, second date, third date, fifth date, presumably sex is a normal part of dating. Okay? Now, dating is not marriage. So there's no sense of monogamy here. And this is a normal thing that people do. And in our society, that is the cultural norm. If you watch television, you will see that even characters that are supposedly Christian will follow this. You never see anybody on television say, oh, no, we need to get married. You'll never see that. Well, I shouldn't say that. You might see it, but if you do, the character is a nut job. Okay? It's totally backward and wrong. There's somebody to be laughed at. Okay? They are put up there for scorn, not to follow. The reasonable people might say, wait till your third date. That's being reasonable. Okay? That's practicing prudence. That's what our society considers chastity. Okay. Let's talk about the serious relationship. Because it turns out that at least women typically want a serious relationship sooner or later. And what does a serious relationship look like on TV? And I'm picking on TV because it is the norm that we're looking at. It's not what everybody agrees with, but the serious relationship, the first big question is the first time we're going to have sex. We've just discussed that. You meet the right person. Who is the right person? Well, the right person is just, I don't know, you form an attachment. You like them, you like to spend time with them, you're compatible or something like that. You might want to spend the rest of your life with them. So then the first exciting moment in the development of this serious relationship is the first time these two actually sleep together, okay? It's a very sweet and wonderful moment on television. What happens next? There'll be a decision to move in together. Nobody ever says, we shouldn't have done that. But I'd like to do it again, let's get married. That never happens. It's that they start sleeping together. There's the first time, which is very romantic, and then they start sleeping together. And then one of them will say, hey, maybe we should move in together. And then they move in together. And that's step number 2 in a serious relationship. Otherwise, you're just dating, and if you make 3 dates with one guy, I guess you're okay. And then what's next? Yeah, I say marry, maybe. Maybe you have a baby first, maybe you get pregnant first, then you decide to get married, or maybe there's just no discussion of marriage at all. If there is marriage, we may be talking about years later. Okay. That is a serious relationship. Other relationships are more casual. So,
if they're really serious, then they share a checkbook.
yeah. Yeah, we normally don't get into those sorts of details, do we? Pregnancy is strictly a choice, but a different choice than the choice to get married. I made the comment last week that the decision to get, for your typical young couple, the decision to get married is the decision to have children. Now, you might have exceptions here or there, but the norm is, well, okay, wasn't it used to be the case that when a young couple got married, what do the parents want? Grandkids. They're right away asking about it. When are we going to have grandkids, okay? That's considered very rude now. You do not talk to your kids about whether we're going to have grandkids. That's none of your business. Really? I think it is. But pregnancy is considered absolutely a thing that we will do when it's time. How old should a woman be before she decides to have children, whether she's married or not? Because, by the way, the decision to get pregnant is not the same as the decision to get married. And so in our culture, it's mostly okay for a woman who's not married to decide to have children. This is the Murphy-Brown thing. Okay. How old should a woman be before she has a child? In our culture, do you think?
21.
21? Wow. No, I'll tell you why not. Because the woman first has to date around, okay? But also, she's got to get through college. She's got to get a job. Got to pursue the career. And then once we get far enough into the career that you have time for this sort of thing, if that ever happens.
45.
Yeah, we're right. Well, so the funny thing is, what happens, and this is happening a lot in our society today, women are putting off having children to later and later and later because they're pursuing careers, and because they don't want to be tied down. Okay? And so at 35, they begin to realize for the first time that they actually don't have forever, and if they wait till they're 45, the odds are they've waited too long. Okay? Well, yeah, for many it is. And kids are taxing, even if you're 21. Okay? They're even more taxing if you're 35. So, but the idea is to put off having children. Not to get to it because children are so important, but to put it off until you get the other things all in place. It's sort of like, when should we get a dog? Well, we got to get a house first, so we have a yard, and we put the dog in the yard. Okay, when should we have a child? Well, after we have the dog. Okay, then we'll have the child. It's that kind of an attitude. Pregnancy is a choice distinct from getting married, and, by the way, it's a choice whether, maybe we will or maybe we won't have children. Now, of course, this has always been the case. Not every woman has always wanted to have children. But as a cultural norm, the assumption was that every man is going to have a wife, every woman wants to have children, the men are going to want to have children too, and we're all going to want to be in families. It doesn't always work that way, okay? But that would be the norm. The norm today is maybe you want it, maybe you don't. That's your choice. But the first thing to do is get through college and get a good job and be stable and self-supporting. Okay, that's key. Yeah.
I think the older a woman is, the fewer children
Definitely.
they get.
Definitely. Partly, primarily as a matter of biology, but another reason is because if you're putting off children until you're 35 because you're pursuing other things, probably having a lot of children is probably not what you want. But in addition, if you wait till you're 35, there's only so many kids you're going to have. Now, actually, our society today, our country, our birth rates are plummeting. 1.6 or 1.7, sometimes. So that is below replacement. So the thing, our country is not having a problem with this population now, and that's because of immigration. But Europe's having a problem. We will have a problem if immigration ever stops flooding across our borders, legal or illegal. I mean, the fact of the matter is, we're not having kids. One of the major reasons why churches are not growing. Christians aren't having children. Okay? Yep.
I know of a case, though, where a couple were living together. They got pregnant, and they decided not to get married because the government would pay for the birth.
Right. And so, and that's common. Actually, there is a penalty for getting married. And you think, well, how does that come about? And it comes about because we have totally different priorities being built in. It wasn't intended. I mean, I don't think that they put that law together with the intention of undermining marriage. But it's been pretty clear that that's what it's... Our efforts to alleviate poverty have caused a lot of damage to families, precisely because it encourages people not to get married. Well, we'll be hitting these things again and again as we go round and round. Pregnancy as a choice that we can time when we want. I'm going to have 2 kids. One will be a boy, one will be a girl. I'll start having them at 35. If you do that, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. Okay, but clearly somebody who that's their way of looking at it. That person does not have family first and foremost. It's something that we do after. Whereas I would argue from a Christian point of view, family should be first and foremost. Consider your career later. Now, I realize that practically speaking, we may have to be doing 2 things at once. I'm really talking about what takes primacy in your heart. Okay? Can you imagine, for me, I cannot imagine myself without my wife and children. If I decided, for example, I just wasn't going to have a wife and children. I just can't imagine wanting that or desiring that. Now, if it happened, well, then I'd figure it out, okay? Because God didn't put me here and keep me from having children for nothing. So I'm still God's child, and I'm still going to serve him. But if God were to ask me, would you prefer to have a career where you can focus on your career, a wonderful career like I have? So I'm not talking about drudgery, working in a factory, screwing on bolts. I mean, we're going to have a wonderful career. You'll be a pastor of a church, and you're going to be very happy doing this. Do you want to do that without children? Or do you want to have children and maybe not have the perfect career, or yes, you do, but it's going to be, secondary to your wife and kids and all that goes in there. And my answer would be absolutely the second one, and I think that that is the right answer that we should have. If God puts you in a situation where you just can't have children, okay, well then that happens. But otherwise, to me, we ought to be raising little boys and little girls to be little moms and little dads when they get older, okay? That's what we should. And if it turns out that this little girl grows up and doesn't want children for some reason or another, this boy grows up and doesn't want children for some reason or another, okay, well then maybe that's okay. But the norm should be, I want you to dream about, and I want to demonstrate to you how to be a good dad, how to be a good mom, and the joys of being a family, okay? Because there'll be jobs out there. There's lots of work out there for you to do, but this is a uniquely wonderful thing to do. All right, pregnancy as a choice is not putting family first. It's sort of fitting it in when it has. And then the unplanned pregnancy. Television programs are filled with the unplanned pregnancy. What is the big question I'm talking about? Am I going to keep the child? Okay. Now, let's just backtrack and compare that question to what a human being is and ponder that. Okay? Are you going to keep the child? Most parents pray and pray and pray for the safety of their children and would rather die themselves 1,000 times than watch their children die. Because that's the way it's supposed to be. Okay. This is our cultural norm. These things here, you don't have to teach these. It's just in the water. It's everywhere. And unfortunately, the church has done way too little teaching about what life is, and therefore why it needs protection, and what is underneath all these rules that we're talking about. It just hasn't done this very well. And as a result, there are people who, young women and young men, grow up in the church and never learn this stuff. This is a silver lining to where our society has gone, that suddenly the church is finding itself in the jarring position of having to teach things we haven't taught in a long time. And by taught, I don't mean it's not taught anywhere, but I mean it hasn't been emphasized. And now all of a sudden, we now have to specify what exactly a marriage is. We have to say things like a man and a woman. Nobody ever thought to say that 20 years ago. Who thought, well, that's what a marriage is? Now we do, okay? So the silver lining is, maybe we have to get back to basics, and maybe that's something that we should have been doing a long time ago and weren't. Okay, cheating on the person you're sleeping with is wrong. Our society doesn't like that. You're not supposed to two-time people. There are such things as open marriages and all of that kind of stuff, but they're still kind of exceptional. Usually, we do not practice polygamy, okay? But we do practice a kind of serial polygamy, if you understand what I'm talking about. So you divorce and remarry, divorce and remarry, divorce and remarry. So you have lots of husbands and lots of wives, just not all at the same time. We don't get into that. So cheating is wrong, but not divorce. Divorce may be sad and maybe not. Okay? You can buy Hallmark cards celebrating a divorce. They're a bit humorous, but divorce is never wrong in the sense that you were bad to do it. And that, okay, well, according to our society, you freely get into a marriage and you can freely get out of one. Now let's think about privileges, and we're going to rifle through these because if I go too long, I'll get in trouble. But I want you to consider who, or what kinds of people this moral order is privileging. Who it's putting ahead of whom, okay? It privileges the individual over the family and the community. Your family has no rights with respect to, in other words, you satisfy your sexual desire and your personal fulfillment is privileged in this moral code, almost by definition, because your personal well-being is what's most important, okay? And the community and your family is just going to have to accept whatever it accepts. So if you have 5 marriages, then your family is forced to accept 5-step mothers or fathers, and all the different blended families and all the different things. And the society is going to have to deal with this too, because this is how you've chosen. These are the decisions that you've made. It privileges adults over children. All you have to do is get involved with family court for 10 minutes and you'll realize that the expression, the best interest of the child is what this court is all about, is not true. Now, it's not really the judge's fault. I'm not trying to say, well, the judge really doesn't believe that. It's that the whole system means, no, we're in divorce court because the children's best interests were not primary. Primary was what the parents wanted, and the parents wanted a divorce. So now that the parents have a divorce, we're going to do what's second best. We're going to try to do the next best thing for the children. Because the best thing is the parents stay together and raise the child.
Is that no fault divorce? Is that what you're?
Well, yeah, even fault divorce. I'm not saying that 2 people necessarily should stay together even under all circumstances. No fault divorce makes a travesty of divorce. It just means that 2 people get divorced for any reason, every reason, and no reason at all, and devil may care what happens to the kids. Okay, there's no way you can argue that you're putting the kids first, allowing a thing like that. And by allowing, I don't want you to think so much about what the law should be. I want you to think about what cultural attitudes should be. Okay? That 2 people get divorced when they didn't have to get divorced, we don't ask questions. We should, because kids are hurt a lot in things like that. But we privilege the rights of adults to pursue their happiness and their dreams over the needs of the children. We are privileging the current generation over the next. Okay? So you get to do what you want. And if the next generation, we hardly have any kids, or if we've aborted half of them, that's not our problem. That's the next generation's problem. Privilege is the healthy, wealthy, beautiful, and strong. You stop and think about that. Allowing everybody this kind of freedom privileges those who can take care of themselves, the beautiful and the rich, because they can find partners, and the strong who can take care of themselves. The rest are really on the outs here. Okay? I would say also it privileges predatory men. Okay? Lets them have a lot of fun with no consequences. It privileges both men and women who don't want a family. So if you don't want a family, this is good. If you want to throw all your life and all your efforts at a job and getting rich, our cultural values will allow you to do that and privilege that. If you wish to have family instead, it will allow it, but we're not privileging that. Okay? So this is the moral order that we're dealing with today. And it's a moral order that is based on personal self-fulfillment, and it is based on guaranteeing the rights and freedoms of individuals to do what they want and to satisfy their needs and desires, and it throws duty to the wind, and it costs a lot. Okay? So, well, we don't have time to go any further. Next week we will, though. Let's close with prayer. Lord Jesus, we thank you for who we are. Lord, creatures made in your image for the purpose of glorifying you and with an eternal future before us. We pray, Lord, that you would teach us to live like that. For we are so precious in your sight that you sent your Son to die for us and redeem us. Lord, you have made it such that although we have damaged ourselves terribly, we are still redeemable, and you have redeemed us. So help us, O Lord, as your people, to show the way to what life means, what a truly sanctified life means for all of how we live. And bless your people here in this world. Amen.